This is a mob farm that produces up to triple the rates of similar designs and costs less redstone to make. It uses dirt cheap and heavily optimized boat clocks for the timing of the farm, making storage both cheaper and item batching better, and is also available in a beginner version that still more than doubles the drops of common mob farms. The beginner version alone has high enough rates to autocraft just under 9,000 bone meal every hour, nearly 1.5 times Ilmango's popular design you may be familiar with, and more than a 2x2 Chromos module as well, although it requires a player to AFK the system. The large version goes even beyond this and makes more than 11,500 bone meal every hour, and all that is compacted to bone blocks automatically. I also used all this bone meal to generate a ton of bamboo planks, which can fuel a great beginner super smelter. If you're interested in seeing that video when it comes out, then consider subscribing to the channel. So at this point you can skip forward to the tutorial if you want to. However, I'd really recommend you watch the mechanics portion of this video, because if you're anything like I was when I started playing the game, then you are being lied to about mob farms. So let's do a quick experiment, shall we? So let's just pretend like I'm new to Minecraft and want to find a mob farm. So I'll just search something like best Minecraft mob farm and see what comes up. So right here, you can probably see that there's an issue with the way YouTube suggests things. And you may start to notice some common themes along these designs. For example, this one, this one, this one, and this one, and this one. Oh look, it's like it's the same design by the same channels, but they're saying it's for different versions. This one, this one. So let me show you a little bit of a more extreme example. Voltrox, Voltrox, Voltrox. Voltrox. The list goes on. And I'm sure you've seen these designs before. So how do you know what's going on here? Believe it or not, what you just witnessed is an entire industry based around taking stolen mob farms without credit, rehashing them a little bit to make them look original, and then pawning them off to viewers who don't know any better. And there are so many people who are new to Minecraft that this is literally making these channels livelihoods, because for these types of content creators, this is their job, and they make money off of you. All their channels are trying to do is make things that people can click on and watch for as little effort as possible. Some will have completely falsified rates and broken farms, as in Day 6. Some will try to make the same mob farm for every single update and pawn it off like it's something new, as in Voltrox. But the bottom line is, they don't know how to actually explain the farms themselves or how to test them, and they want you to not know either so that you can keep watching their videos and make them money. The real world kind of sucks, doesn't it? So do you want to keep being spoon-fed bad designs, or learn what it really means to make a mob farm? Pretty much all of those designs are based on the farms by two players. The first was Etho with the classic mob farm. This was made about 13 years ago now, in a time when Minecraft was a lot more simple of a game. And he was innovating that stuff before a lot of redstone even existed in Minecraft. And as such, his design is a lot more simple and not quite as powerful by today's standards. But it will always hold a special place in our hearts. And the second is a farm about 6 years ago made by Gnembon. Gnembon's video goes into a lot of the details of mob farming, so I'd highly recommend you watch that here. However, I'll be going through the highlights real quick so that we'll know what is still relevant for today and what improvements can we even make beyond what Gnembon has done in this video. And one more person whose videos I want to shout out before I get into the process is Frinocraft. His work with optimizing the clocks of these farms is actually very influential for this video, so I would highly recommend going and watching his videos as well. Yeah, definitely go check that out, and I want to give a huge shout out to him. So what do we need to consider in order to make a better mob farm? Before we begin, I'd just like to point out that better means very different things to different people. More technical players would probably refer to a high-effort perimeter-based mob farm as better, while beginners usually value overly cheap and easy farms as better for them. So it's very helpful to recognize design goals before we start the process of farm building, which can give us a clear vision for what we want to make in particular. For this farm, I'm aiming to upgrade Gnembon's classic design to be as cheap as possible, as simple to build as possible, and easily upgradable for players who are a little bit more aspirational, all while getting the current best rates for a single tower mob farm that is 11 platforms or less. It should be accessible to pure beginners and still be useful for more technical players as an early to mid-game option. Oh, and since we can now autocraft bones into bone meal and bone meal into bamboo, and bamboo into wooden planks, I also want to design this so that it's easy to add on a super smelter module afterward. If you want to see that video as soon as it comes out, consider subscribing to the channel, as that'll be the next video I work on and it'll be out pretty soon. So now that we have our design goals, the first thing to understand about intelligent mob farm design is that there are a lot of different aspects of the farm that we can change. In scientific language, these things are called variables because, well, they can vary. For this farm, the 5 most important variables for high rates are the killing method, the biome you build it in, the number of platforms stacked vertically, the shape of each platform, or really the area of each platform, and the timings of the water flushing and the non-water flushing phases. So of course the Y level of the farm also needs to be minimized, but since most people already know this, it's not really an interesting variable to work through for the video. For this farm, we're doing the absolute minimum Y level that we can without digging or making a perimeter of some sort. And of course also without having to spawn proof any of the caves below the farm. So let's go through these. For killing method, we have 2 main options, fall damage versus looting. If we want to use looting, we would need to either push up the height map of the farm, leading to less efficient spawning, or use another elevator requiring lots of obsidian and more materials. We also would have a more complicated killing chamber and would require a good enchanted sword to operate the farm at decent rates. While it's not a huge hassle to do any of these things, I found from testing that we can still get great rates without having to mess with looting at all, and absolute simplicity for pure beginners is a major design goal, so we'll be going with fall damage as the killing method here. Some beginners might be angry about not being able to farm XP from the system or feel like they're missing out. To those people, I would just say that there are better sources of XP for each phase of the game that you're in. For early game, you might want to look at a villager trading system, for example, especially if you have an iron farm to trade all of those ingots with, like in my iron farm villager breeding trade hall, maybe. For the mid to late game, things like an enderman farm, a gold farm, or a guardian farm are much better options to actually do enchanting at compared to an overworld mob farm of this scale. And for our farm, it's also just nice for beginners to not need access to high enchants or expensive swords to run the farm. It's always good to remove a prerequisite if you can get pretty similar performance. And in this case, we do have very similar performance to the looting version of this farm. So now that we've gotten our killing method, we need to look at the biome change variable. Where we build the farm can actually increase our rates drastically. Most mob farms are built in the ocean these days, where the height of the farm can be minimized. However, if we go to a desert biome, we'll find that the pure zombies take up much less of the spawn weight of the biome compared to husks. And husks require sky access to spawn, so none of them will be spawning in our farm that is covered. So what this means is that if we build our farm in the desert, the number of zombies spawn will be about 1/5 of what it would be in any other biome, and the rest of the mobs spawn more comparatively. This is great because zombies and rotten flesh are basically useless drops, meaning that we get around a 10 to 17% increase in the useful drop rates of the farm. It's actually deceptive to reference the total items per hour of mob farms because the ocean variant sounds way better until you take into account the rotten flesh. And when that useless drop is removed, we'll see that the desert vastly outperforms the ocean variant. This is why when I refer to the rates of the farm, I always reference the non-rotten flesh drops, which is significantly higher in the desert and a much better metric overall. I will say that if the rates of the ocean variant are fine with you, then you can build that farm in the ocean at sea level if you like. I'll be including a schematic for that version in the description, but the tutorials later on in the video will only be for the desert variants because I don't have infinite time to make tutorials and the desert versions are definitely worth it. So next, let's look at the number of platforms, the area of each platform, and the water flush timings. These 3 variables are all deeply related to each other, and changing one of these variables mean that you probably need to tweak the others if you want the farm to be optimized again. To begin, let's take a look at Gnembon's mob farm and the data from when we run it for a while. You'll see that the average number of mobs in the world at any given time doesn't even come close to the mob cap of 70. This means that we have a lot of room in the mob cap to keep spawning mobs and make this more efficient. And this is something that Gnembon was well aware of, but it's still a great design as it is. Next, I'd like to talk about a concept that I'm calling, in very non-technical terms, the spawn velocity. Essentially, what this means in my brain is that the more spawn spaces we have available, the faster mobs will actually spawn in and hit the cap. Getting a higher spawn velocity is important for getting faster rates in the farm, which means that the total area we have is also very important. However, if we want more area and just end up increasing the vertical number of platforms, this means that there will be less of a chance for mobs to spawn per platform because of how spawn probability works in the algorithm. So we could get more spawns, but each platform will be less and less efficient as we build up, making our resources better used elsewhere. So a better choice would be to build outwards. Even though this will increase the lifetime a little for each mob when it is flushed back into the center, we'll find later on that this change is in fact worth it for an easy expansion and a higher spawn velocity. And to do that, we have to look at how the signal transferring works in these farms. So the standard way to do this is by propagating a signal downwards leading into the dispensers below, and this passes a signal down through the farm and makes the water sequentially flush on each shelf. On the next redstone redstone input to the top, you'll see that the water will be transferred downwards through the farm and all the platforms will become unflushed. Now on some bad versions of the farm, you'll see that they'll have the signal going upwards from the very bottom, which seems good until you actually go to turn the water off for all the platforms, because whenever you do so, the signal will propagate upwards through the farm itself, and you'll see that the observers are getting multiple signals from whenever the water goes back in and flushes onto the middle, and this leads to a lot of different signals transferring upwards, and it will eventually rest, and some of the platforms having water and some of them not. This is detrimental if we're trying to have a clock that optimizes our water flushing time, because we want all the water to flush at the same time in order to optimize it for it to be as short as possible. So looking at this cross section of the kind of diamond shape that water takes, how do we actually increase the number of spawning spaces whenever water only flows a set number of times? So you might think that we could just delete this block right here, let the water flow down, and then have the water going out this way in sort of this kind of shape. But you'll find that this actually doesn't work very well. It will also prevent flushing on the platform below it, which is a huge hassle to deal with. Essentially, to get around this, you'd have to make this 3 tall, which makes us run into a lot of other issues in the farm. Namely, now the height map is increased and we have to deal with enderman spawns. So overall, this is generally not a good idea, but thankfully there's one more interesting trick we can use. You'll see if we rearrange the observers and the dispensers like this, we'll find that the water being on top of the observer itself actually lets it spread out one space farther than the previous way. This means that for a slight change in orientation, we can get a significant increase in the spawn area per platform. We'll see that whenever the farm takes away the water, none of it will actually flow back onto the observers itself, meaning that the phase will stay the same on every platform. And if we use some non-spawnable blocks in the middle, we'll find that spreading the platforms out to a wider radius will help us increase the number of spawns per platform. Because the mobs don't spawn in the middle and only spawn on the edges of the platform, we'll find that they still have the same amount of time until they reach the edge from the water flushing. You do have to put some non-spawnable blocks in the middle of each layer, but however, there's not very many of them per platform compared to the spawnable area at all. So here is a visual demonstration of the areas per platform. So with the observer here, the extra area you get is the yellow along the edge. For this quick change in orientation, we get an extra 32 spawning spaces on each platform, which is really cool. And if we let the water in the middle flow over non-spawnable blocks, which in this example would be the black concrete in the middle, the yellow and the green is the total boost in area that you get for each platform. So here, for just 24 non-spawnable blocks in the middle, we get an extra 152 spawning spaces on the outside of the area, all without sacrificing lifetime on this portion. So because we swapped the orientation of the redstone signal line, we managed to increase the area and therefore spawn velocity of the farm a little for the small version and a good amount for the large version. Some designers, including Gnembon himself, have opted for multi-tower designs in order to increase the spawn area without increasing the build height. This works reasonably well, but the significant increase in materials and resources to accomplish that are outside of our overly simplistic design goals. So now let's talk about the water flushing phase. We want the water to be on only long enough to push all the mobs off of each platform and not any longer than that. In my testing, this is around 4.5 seconds or so. For the large version of the farm that is pushing closer to the mob cap, this is better than the timings that Fruno was using for his slightly smaller platforms with less spawn velocity, approximately 3 seconds flushing on phase for his design. So we want the water flushing time to be as close to 4.5 seconds as possible, but how long do we have to wait between those flushes? This is another optimization problem that's dependent on the spawn velocity, which you'll remember is a function of the spawn probability and the total area of the farm. So I agree with Fruno that 11 platforms seems to be a pretty good balance of build effort to reward here. So I did a lot of my testing with this number of platforms to get all my data for the optimal water flushing phases. So you'll see that if we want a robust testing setup for this, we can use an etho hopper clock to get a precise total time for the clock itself to repeat by the number of items in here. And we can also use a variable pulse extender to configure the ideal time for water flushing. And this is how I arrived at the 4.5 seconds. Really, it's about 4.4, which is 11 items divided by 2.5 items a second in a hopper. So what I found is about 4.5 seconds on and 19 seconds off is ideal for the small platform shape, and about 4.5 seconds on and 12 seconds off is ideal for the large platform shape. Give or take a little bit on all of those. And if we can get a clock that's pretty close to that's a lot cheaper than this, then that would be our ideal goal. These testing clocks are incredibly precise, but they're definitely not the cheapest that you can use for this sort of thing, because we'll find that we can get extremely close to the timings we need with boat clocks. These are novelties that have existed for quite some time now, but I've never seen someone try and take a deep dive into them before, so I did a lot of science here. And by science, I mean water push boat in different shapes. Starting off, we have about the smallest boat clock that you can possibly make, but of course we all know how useful small things can be. There are a few different variables we can change, namely the shape of the water flowing and the type of item that blocks the water in the center, and of course we'll have a pressure plate that'll actually give us the redstone output whenever the boat falls on it, as you can see by this lamp right here. So an option to make the boat go a little bit more slowly in most of the designs is a fence. If we take a look at hitboxes, you'll see that there is the perfect amount of room for a boat to just barely slide past a fence on either side, because the hitbox of a boat is actually a square despite what it looks like. And over here we have a very similar shape for the water, but however we're using a pressure plate in the middle, which changes the timing up a little bit. Which what this does is gives a little bit of give to where the boat can start moving laterally before it hits the wall. This means that if you use pressure plates in the middle instead of fences, typically it can speed up the clock's designs that you're using. And here is the next biggest size shape, where we have some different combinations of both fences and pressure plates in the middle. You'll see that the design with the fence is once again a little bit slower than with the pressure plate, because the boat can kind of move over the space where the pressure plate was. And I'll spare you the details, but there are a lot of different shapes that you can make with these, and the timings for them are all very imprecise and a little bit frustrating to work with. However, you can get some pretty funky looking stuff that's just kind of fun to play around with. If you wanted to make longer delay circuits out of this, you could do something like this, but who wants to build this instead of just a little bit of redstone? You can also make circuits that kind of mess with the timing a little bit, where you can swap out pressure plates and the fences in order to change up the timings a little bit in order to get more precise for what you need. So it's really up to you what all you can do with boat clocks, and I've only shown pretty much the tip of the iceberg when it comes to basic designs here. But when we're talking about things that are applicable to the mob farm, we have a few different criteria that we need. Long story short, there's a lot of different candidates for the types of boat clocks we should use for the farm. However, there are two clear winners when it comes to our mob farm shapes. And oh yeah, there's something else I forgot to mention about boat clocks. They're directional. This is fun to look at and cause me pain. And this is just me brute forcing how orientation affects both of these boat clocks, with this group for this one and that group for that one. Long story short, a lot of the timings can be vastly different, and sometimes the rotation even completely breaks the farm. I've done a little bit of head scratching about this, but I still can't for the life of me figure out why this is directional. If it's water, I don't believe it's the boat entities, but it's weird regardless. But the key takeaway is, if you're facing north, there'll be the optimal clock working with the ideal timings for both this shape and this one. This means that if you want to upgrade the farm from the small boat clock into the large boat clock, you don't have to redesign the whole thing. You just have to take out a few blocks to make it into the other shape and change the water direction flowing the opposite way. And here are the timings for both of these clocks. This one's for the small version, so it has a slightly longer off phase for the water. So you see that we get pretty close to the 4.5 second value. Just because everything's approximate, we have a little bit of give there, but the rates are still extremely close to what it would be otherwise. So the large version of the farm actually has a lot higher spawn velocity, so the time the water is going to be off can be a lot less. This is how we get away with higher rates of the farm, because we have this cycling more frequently, but we still hit cap just as much as we do for that one with less time on the clock, so that makes it a little bit more efficient there. And the water on phase of approximately 5 seconds is about the same as this one over here, which you'll see is caused by the boat sliding over the pressure plate in this sort of general shape, like so. So now that we have our timings down for the farm, I'd like to talk about the peripheral design choices, or really the extra details we need to figure out in order to make this thing actually operational. We have the water flushing platform, item collection, storage, build or upgrade considerations, and the AFK spot, or the despawn sphere placement. So for the water flushing platform, these are usually what people try to make unique about copycat mob farms, but the shape that Gnembon had in his original video is really just the best, mainly because it allows the entire surface on top of this to be flowing water, meaning that there's no dead spots of glass or slabs for mobs to fall on and get stuck. And this means that this platform can be a little bit smaller than it would be otherwise, which will save us some materials. I was thinking about the easiest way to build this platform when it dawned on me that scaffolding is actually a superior way to do this. So you can see this ring of slabs right here around in this shape, and this is actually what all the scaffolding is resting on. So you can make this ring of slabs here and then place scaffolding out to its build limit of 6 blocks blocks in this kind of octagonal shape here, and this allows you to make the general shape within just a few minutes. And then if you place another ring of slabs around on the outside of this and place scaffolding out to exactly 4 blocks, place another block on the outer perimeter of that, this is incredibly easy to do and simple to build this whole area. And if you're wondering what resource pack this is that lets you see these very easily, it's Redstone Tweaks, which I would highly recommend if you ever do any kind of redstone building to have that as an option to be able to toggle that resource pack on and off. You'll see that we need a few temporary blocks in order to get the water flowing in this shape to where it doesn't spill over the edge, but it's very simple to do, and I show how to do this in the tutorial. And for this particular farm, I've decided to go ahead and just build one platform that's big enough for both the small and large, and do that for both tutorials because it's really easier to do that way, so you don't have to redo all these flowing water sources here. So you can just build one and never have to worry about the bottom portion water flushing again. And one more quick thing about this is that if you don't have scaffolding, feel free to build this out of whatever material you like. It could be either a spawnable or a non-spawnable, since everything is covered by water anyway. So you can do glass, you can do cobblestone or whatever, and it'll all work for that if that's easier for you. Of course, if you do have access to scaffolding at all, it's actually much easier to do it this way, but if you don't, then it might be easier to, use whatever materials you have on hand for that. So in the middle here, we can decrease mob lifetime a little bit by making this a 5x5 instead of a 3x3. Plus that actually keeps them from crowding in this general area, makes them all fall faster, as well as being 1 block less that they have to travel here in the first place. These slabs around here on the inside edge actually prevent spiders from being able to climb on them and get stuck right here. So this is a very necessary part of the farm as well. So next we'll be moving on to item collection. And here I actually have another new system that I hadn't seen implemented before. Many people love to use hoppers or hopper minecarts for these types of collections, but because the rates for the farm are actually well over hopper speed and hoppers can back up very easily, it would save us a lot of materials if we could find another system besides either hoppers or hopper minecarts. So I've come up with a unique design that relies on an out of phase boat clock to flush the items at the bottom in the brief window when we know that no mobs will be falling right here. Because this boat clock matches the one on top, we know that there will always be no mobs in that particular period of time, so we'd be safe to flush water there. This means that essentially 0 mobs will ever have their fall damage canceled out due to the flowing water. It also means that the items will be flushed in nice batches into storage. They'll all kind of bunch up in this water elevator and slowly rise up and go into storage. And here, if we were to use a soul sand elevator, this would actually be detrimental because a lot of the items would get sent up before they can stack. So having it this way actually means that there's a lot less entities in the world from the mob farm. And it's something small, but it is very nice. And once they rise up here, they'll be flushed in this water stream into storage. So because we have these larger batches of items, they're actually big enough to very slightly overwhelm signal strength 3 filters, which are only able to batch up to 23 items at a time. That's why we can get away with using these extra cheap signal strength 2 filters that are AB tileable right here. They're both signal strength 2 filters, but they're different slices so that the redstone doesn't interfere with each other. These filters only require 1 filter item and can accept up to 63 total items in the filters themselves. They're also cheaper per slice than the signal strength 3 filters as well. The setup I have here has a few hoppers, which may be a decent amount for beginners. So it might be a good idea to have, even a single pod iron farm would be more than enough to supply all the iron you need for this. If you really don't have that much iron, then you could take out a few layers of storage down here if you really were on a budget. Additionally, I have full filters for the glass bottles and glowstone slices, which are these 2 right here. However, in all practicality, these don't make hardly any at all in the farm. I've been AFKing these a while and there's still only a few in here compared to all the redstone and all the others, so probably don't want this many chests for these 2 slices. You could get away with just 1 double chest of each here, save some hoppers that way. If you think you might want to build my upcoming super smelter attachment that makes bamboo planks out of the bones of the farm, you'll probably want the bones to be on this end here and on this last filter, just for easy redstone placement of that system later on. So we can also get away with having the water stop right here and the items sliding over a few ice blocks for the rest of the way. And after that, we'll actually burn all the excess items at the end here in this soul fire on top of either soul sand or soul soil. If we had regular fire with netherrack here, it would melt this ice, and if we had packed ice here so that it wouldn't melt, then you wouldn't be able to access these 2 chests right here because it would not be able to open. So that's why I have it in this configuration like so. And one more thing you can upgrade about storage is an extremely simple bone to bone block crafting system like this. You'll see that this is just 2 crafters back to back and a very simple observer clock. It won't ever craft any white dye because the bone meal always comes in groups of 3 at one time from each bone. And this is a great option if you want to automatically compact the bones and the bone blocks for the farm. So as far as upgrades to the farm go, you could keep this 7x7 7th floor sand if you like, but you'll start to get more mobs with feather falling that survive the fall the longer you run the farm because of local difficulty, which leads to very slight rate decreases. So if we place the despawn sphere at exactly the right height, these mobs will all despawn whenever they're flushed off the edge in order to not clog up the mob cap. So you'll see that he disappeared right there. On very rare occasions, a zombie can pick up an item before this happens, which would make it persist down here. So we need at least one magma block down here in the water stream to keep them from slowly accumulating here, becoming a nuisance later and kind of running around this whole area causing mischief. As it is now, the height is enough to kill all the mobs in the farm without considering feather falling, and this is including witches. Because of this, you'll still get all the witch drops for the farm. And if we have this sand, we can omit the wall in front of here as well, because we're relying on despawning to take those mobs out of the cap. But personally, what I'd recommend doing is just spending 5 minutes in the nether getting 49 magma blocks and putting a wall here. This is going to ensure that you kill every single mob that drops down here and keep their drops. This gives a slight increase in the farm rates, which if I remember correctly, it's about 200 items per hour more of each of the main items like bones and gunpowder. Plus it's a little more safe whenever you're walking around here in survival to have a wall all the way around this area. Another part of the farm that you can upgrade is actually the platforms themselves, of course, as I've talked about before. And I'll show what this general process looks like in the tutorial. You'll find that it's very simple to upgrade. And this process gets us about a 27% increase in the non-rotten flesh drops. Another upgrade to the farm that more technical players might like is I added an optional storage here for shulker loading, just because this farm is producing almost half hopper speed, so I figured it'd be a good option to throw in there for the people who want it. And around back you'll see that I have another system for automatically crafting the shulker boxes. This is a better version of that than the last one I had on my barter farm. For this version of storage, you'll see that I've actually gotten rid of the glowstone and the bottles, just mainly because you don't want to have a whole slice for these, because there's hardly any that the farm is producing. If it's simplistic storage, then that's fine and we can have a few for it, but you don't really want to build this whole slice for something that's not going to produce hardly anything. Plus, for players who have the infrastructure to build this whole improved storage, probably have much better ways of getting both glowstone and bottles, considering that manual farming could easily surpass what this thing can produce in 10 hours in, under 30 minutes. So that's why I don't have these in this version, and once again you can also omit them for the simple storage as well if you so desire. And another upgrade that I'll show in my next video is the super smelter build. This uses the bone meal turning into bamboo planks, and turning that into fuel for all these furnaces, and the fuel chests also store loads of planks if you need wood later. This makes a furnace that smelts more than 5,500 items every hour with the player AFKing up at the top of the farm here. And if you have a lot of bamboo storage in these chests here, it'll smelt more than 11,000 items every hour. So if you want to see this thing in action, consider subscribing and check that video out when it comes out. So lastly, for the AFK platform, we want to try and minimize the height map as much as possible. So I've gone ahead and used scaffolding on the edge and just pillared up from the center of the farm up to this AFK spot. You'll need a light blocking and non-spawnable block above your head to stop phantoms, so a bottom slab works great. If you want some extra peace of mind, you can put some glass blocks around the player and it won't cause any measurable change in rates for the farm just from those glass blocks. So for the tutorial, I'll be building the simple version first and then upgrading every aspect of the farm afterwards so that you can stop whenever you want to or build it to completion for the whole thing. Before you go into the build tutorial, I have a few things that are very important that you listen to. The first off being to really take the time and read all the text that is on the screen during the process. Paying attention to the instructions makes it to where you have a lot less of a chance to make any mistakes while building the farm. And additionally, if you're building a tutorial and you still run into a question, feel free to hop over in my Discord. The first thing that you should do is check the channel that this mob farm is in for any pinned comments for fixes. This gives a place for common questions of the farm and prevents me from having to write the same thing for about, anywhere from a dozen to 100 people. So with all that out of the way, let's hop into the tutorial and I'll show you how to build it.
하나, 둘, 셋.
If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. This video has taken me months to make, and I always include world downloads and schematics for free, so thanks to everyone who cares enough to leave a like or subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions about the farm, remember to hop in my Discord Spud Central, where there's also a great community that can help with this farm or just redstone in general. Of course, remember to stay tuned for my upcoming super smelter build designed to work with this farm, and I will catch you in the next video.